Dr. Paul Sullivan, thanks so much for joining me today on American Dialogues.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be speaking with you and for Independent Arabia.
Thank you. So let's start with the future of oil. It seems that Gulf states now face a balancing act between maintaining their oil-driven economies and embracing renewable energy. What do you think are the hardest choices that the Gulf leaders are grappling with nowadays?
Well, I'd like to start with something else, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Just take a look around your office where you're walking every day. How much of that uses oil? Most people don't understand how much oil is used in things like medicine, toothpaste, and hospitals, and transportation and electric vehicles. Oil will be with us for a very long time. Think of vanilla ice cream. A lot of people like vanilla ice cream. Where do you think the vanilla flavoring comes from? Crude oil, distillates. It's going to take a while for transportation to shift from oil and also the thousands of other products that use oil. Food uses a lot of oil for fertilizers, for pesticides, and so forth. We can't transition as quickly as some people want. I've always run into people who say, stop oil today. And I say, okay, you want to impoverish the world? How many people do you think live now because of synthetic fertilizers? About 2 billion. They wouldn't be here without natural gas and oil. It's a combination of natural gas and oil. They go hand in hand in many ways. The toughest questions that the Gulf states have to look at is, how can you move from oil at the same time keeping your income high enough and your sovereign wealth funds high enough to take care of your people and not cause disturbances?
You know, we agree on the importance of oil and that it will stay with us. But one question is that how those Gulf states could deal with climate change activists, if we could say, and convince them that we're going to diversify our sources of income and also diversify away from oil, but we need to do it do it while also maintain our main source of income, which is oil.
Well, Essa, as we know, there are extreme prejudices against the Arabs to begin with.
Mm.
And a lot of people won't even listen to the Arab leaders when they say they're going to change to cleaner sources of energy. The head of the COP was the head of an oil company. So all kinds of people are screaming, how can you have the head of the COP, the head of an Arab oil company? This is not going to work. Al Gore is going through the roof. How outrageous is it that we choose this person? That person knows a lot about the environment and has done much for the environment and environmental activities in the UAE. Is it clear where the or Arab oil producers are going? No, it's not clear. But they've made some progress. If you take a look at the UAE and the Saudi Green Initiative and all kinds of things that are happening in the Middle East, there is forward movement. But frankly, in the West, they don't want to hear that. Many of them don't want to hear it. They want to hear Arab oil stealing money from the United States. First of all, we don't import much oil from Arab states anymore. Our biggest source of imported oil is Canada. Big bad Canadians. And I was correcting a paper, one of my students, who said we have to deal with our oil import dependency. And my correction to him is, what dependency? We're the biggest producer of oil in the world, and the biggest producer of natural gas in the world, and the biggest exporter of LNG in the world. This is not the 1970s anymore. We'll see how he reacts to that, but it's correct. If he did his homework, he'll know what I said. A lot of Americans still think of our relationship with the Arab oil states in particular, and the former OPEC, not OPEC plus, like it's still the 1990s. They haven't got up to date on this.
I want to hear more about your perspective on what's going on in the Middle East now and how these tensions can impact the oil market.
Well, I will focus on the impact on the energy markets, not just oil.
Mm-hmm.
Natural gas is affected also. Very few tankers are going through the Suez Canal, which increases the distances of travel and also increase the costs of travel and throws off the logistics. But so far, no major oil or gas facilities or pipelines or refineries have been damaged.
Mm.
What's popping up the price of oil in particular recently, and it's gone back down again, is the sense of risk. And a lot of people try to explain the price of oil by one factor explanations. Oh, it's the Middle East. Oh, it's China. Oh, it's the slowing down of the American economy. There are literally thousands of factors that add into the price of oil. And this is what I take 2 weeks out of my classes explaining. Do not listen to the media. Sorry, NASA, but do not watch American television in particular. Explains what causes prices to go up and down in energy markets.
Yeah.
It's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, and no hard feelings. And speaking of media, and I have one question about media, and I will let you continue your point, but the Saudi Minister for Energy, Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman, criticized media, was in June, criticized media speculation and market analysis, and he warned from them fiddling with the market. So I think that would add to your point.
Well, that works into it because, let's say, the Wall Street Journal article that he referred to, the Financial Times sometimes goes a little off kilter too.
Mm-hmm.
The energy minister knows a lot about the markets. The energy minister of UAE knows a lot about the markets. OPEC plus meetings involve a lot of information. These guys are no kidding experts,
Mm-hmm.
and talk down to them is not a good thing. But the markets can be manipulated by false news or distorted news, and particularly from major business magazines and newspapers. And I've worked on articles to write for such things in the past. They usually want, say, 900 words to 1,500 words in 3 days. Thank you very much. No real research is done in many of these things. And when these energy reporters get on Bloomberg or whatever it is, do they really do the research? They look at the charts for a while and they say, okay, this is what's going to happen now. They don't have time. They're fighting fires all the time. The underlying aspects of energy markets are far more complicated than the deviations that happen day to day or hour to hour. People like to look at the short run. The most important changes happening now in the oil market are what's going to be driving the long run changes. Transportation in China, for example, the EV development, or EVs in Europe. EVs are slowing down in my country because, well, people aren't exactly enamored with them, except in California and some in Florida. And Florida is worried about it, particularly after this storm. What if you have a whole bunch of EVs parked in a flooded out parking lot? It could be dangerous.
How do you assess the development of new technologies in the US now and its role in expanding the longevity of shale and the potential for reducing the extraction costs?
Oh, the United States is a very creative, innovative, inventive state.
Yeah.
And if you think you know what's going on now, you won't know what's going on in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. With the application of AI to the oil and gas business, all bets are off. You can search 4D sonograms in the ground to find more oil and gas and how to get at them with directional drilling, which is part of fracking. You can actually direct the drill bit, the drill pipes, multiple out of one derrick to where this oil and gas is with AI and cut the costs. Saudi Aramco can do the same thing. Anyone can do this, but it depends on who controls the next inventions, who controls AI. AI is going to change the face of energy at all levels, not just oil and gas, but electricity and the new technologies, which some people call clean. I don't call them clean. There's no such thing as clean energy. I think we could absolutely erase that word from our vocabulary and we'd actually get at the issue. If you take a look at the supply chains for the solar, wind, and other, quote, clean energies, they use dirty mining. They use oil, they use gas, they use coal. Chinese production of clean technologies, in quotes, uses mostly coal to make it. So is that clean? If you hide the fact that they don't use coal, everything's great. It's like inviting someone to your house and you tell your wife and the kids or whomever, don't let them in that room. It's not clean.
Yes.
So everyone's going to be leaving your house saying, wow, that's a really clean house. No, clean energy is not clean. And your energy companies understand that. But cleaner is important. Geothermal for Saudi Arabia has a lot of potential and can use the drilling technologies from oil and gas and the engineering and other technologies and ideas that the Saudis already have. And yet you're not doing it. Near Mecca and Medina and in good part of the west and northwest of your country is former volcano land. You can see the former volcanoes. Just drill down there and you're going to have enough heat to fire up electricity. And also for houses, even in Riyadh, you can have a geothermal energy right under the house, under the building, and save on cooling. Ever walk down into the basement of a house here or in England? I'm sure you have. During the summer, it's cooler.
Yes.
That's called geothermal cooling. And you can save a lot of energy by doing that.
Go back to two major oil producers, Russia and
Sure.
Iran, very controversial countries. And they're both sanctioned by the US. Some argue now that the impact of sanctions, the US sanctions primarily, has waned significantly because of the rise of shadow or dark fleets transporting crude oil without insurance or proper flagging. What do you think of that and how we could solve it?
Well, no sanctions work perfectly. And the only sanctions that actually made a difference were on South Africa just before the end of apartheid.
Mm-hmm.
Sanctions on China don't work. No, sanctions on Iran, sorry, for oil don't work because China imports a lot of Iranian oil to make the toys and cars and other equipment that we purchase here. When we buy Chinese toys and other plastics and most other things that the Chinese make to export to our market, they use Iranian oil. Therefore, we're importing Iranian oil, virtual oil.
Mm.
And most Americans don't know that. If I were to walk into Walmart or another store heading toward the holidays and watch people buying things, how many of the toys would be made in China? Most of them. And if they're plastic, where do you think that plastic came from? Probably oil from Iran. So can we sanction Iran fully? Well, we did that for a while.
Yeah. I mean, the Biden
Oil,
administration, I don't
the
know. They want to.
oil revenues were in decline during the Trump administration. Those figures are well known.
Mm.
Biden loosened up.
Yeah.
And he also allowed some funding to go to the Iranian. He also took the Houthis off the terrorism list. And I'm sure the Saudis are still anxious about that. Let's just conclude with that. It's clear. It's a threat to the United States. It has been since the 1979 revolution. It's a threat to Saudi Arabia. It's a threat to the UAE. Not so much a threat to Qatar, but it's a threat to Bahrain, definitely. It's a threat to oil markets in the world. How could that happen? Could they close off the Straits of Hormuz? No, that would be absolutely stupid of them to do that because most of their food and other imports come through the Straits. There's a port they built called Jask. which is just outside of the straits, which allows them to export some oil products and to import food and other things, but not enough. If they were ever to shut off the Strait of Hormuz, they would strangle their own economy. It makes absolutely no sense. What could shut off the Strait of Hormuz if the Iranians not going to do that? If there are altercations that sink a whole bunch of large ships in the thin channels of the straits, and the channels are about 1.6 miles wide. That's not much to fit the larger ships through. You sink them there until those ships are taken out. We got a real problem here. It's not as bad as the Ever Given and the Suez, but that's a possibility. But I give that as a remote possibility.
And also on sanctions, I want to ask you about a statement made or a remark made by Donald Trump, I think recently. He warned that excessive sanctions could weaken the dollar. Do you agree with that?
Well, that could reduce the number of and amount of trade with countries in the world. Yes, it could. But the dollar is the strongest reserve currency. If you look at the numbers from the Bank of International Settlements, the most important currency pairs all include the dollar. We're talking 75, 85% currency pairs include the dollar. Reserve currencies in the central banks of countries throughout the world is still well over 60% US dollars. If someone wants to move to the euro or the Brazilian currency or the ruble, well, go ahead. You lose your shirt. The dollar is the strongest currency on average. Yes, it fluctuates. Every currency fluctuates. The United States economy is powerful. You want to bet on the European economy with its hyper regulation and its movement very quickly to so-called clean energy, and with the problems between France and Germany shutting down the nuclear power plants, and the economic policies of the new leadership in the UK, good luck. Go for it. The power and energy in the future will be North America and the Gulf.
Perfect.
Those will be the two power centers.
Perfect. So one technical question that, some of my colleagues wanted me to ask, is it true that the market now, the energy market, is increasingly driven by demand rather than supply?
Oh, I don't look at it that way. I'm an economist, and I have to look at it as both ways, but it's not demand and supply. What drives things are the factors behind demand and supply. For instance, when China is slowing down and so many of its real estate and investment companies are going bankrupt, that's behind demand. You have to look behind the demand. What are the factors in this? The financial issues that will hit the United States in the next few years because of debt, people are discounting that. Our debt is now well over $35 trillion. Our debt payments are larger than our Pentagon bill. People who don't think debt is an important issue don't understand economics, and they're not interested in national security. The Saudis control debt by simply pumping oil or investing in things that give them money. When you have the oil money, you can transform into other things that can bring you money. Let's say Saudi Arabia has been moving toward a military industry instead of importing military goods. That's important. It's been heading toward mining. It's been heading toward cleaner energy. If you have money, you can make money. If you have oil, you can make money. Saudi Arabia's dollar amounts to get it out of the ground is about like $3, $4, $5 in some place. Much cheaper. It's a cash cow. So when you shift from oil to something else, you better make sure it's going into something else that will be similarly profitable.
Can the Chinese economy, if it recovers, absorb this oversupply, if there is?
If the Chinese economy recovers, they're doing a few things about. They have a huge reserve of oil in their country. They're also investing a lot into coal to liquids, otherwise known as synthetic fuels, just in case. If there's an oversupply in oil, I haven't seen it. It's oil supply and demand reacts accordingly. If you take a look at the charts, they correct themselves. High oil prices are the solution for high oil prices because people will demand less. But it's not just the demand supply, it's what's behind all of that stuff. And there's a lot of risk and psychology in all of this. And that's where the problems in the Middle East and in Russia and in the South China Sea and so forth come in. There's a lot of geopolitical risk out there. That's mainly what's keeping some of the prices high.
Correct.
That's mainly what's keeping some of the investment low.
Mm-hmm.
If I were an investor, would I move into the Middle East right now? Probably not. If it were in high capital equipment, on the ground investment, no. Another aspect of that is rule of law. There are a lot of OPEC countries, not Saudi Arabia, that have a very weak rule of law. Why would I invest in a country like that? I've seen the results of a weak rule of law and corruption in many countries. I stay away like it's the plague. Do you want to impoverish most of Africa by telling them we cannot produce oil? Do you want to tell the Indonesians, forget coal, forget oil, focus on this stuff because it's cool and it will also save the environment, as they're looking at massive poverty in some parts of Indonesia, which would cause instability and a growth of terrorism. Jolo Peninsula and the Philippines, an example of that. There are so many factors that connect in this stuff. It's like a 1600 dimensional spider web.
Yeah.
You pull on this to solve environmental issues, what's going to happen to jobs? What's going to happen to investments? Energy transition justice is a big part of this. And I know that may sound way left-wing. It's not. It's actually good business. Because if you move too quickly, and a lot of people lose their jobs, and a lot of people lose their investments, that's going to hit your country, it's going to hit investment, it's going to hit the bottom line. And most people don't think about energy transition justice. What do you do with all the coal workers in West Virginia? What do you do with all the expat oil and gas workers in Saudi Arabia, the UAE? If this industry disappears, how are you going to retrain them? The example I like to use here is you're looking at a coal worker who's in his 60s in West Virginia, living out in the sticks. There's no other industry nearby. They closed down his mine. They closed down the coal generating station. How does he get a job? He lives off the dole, most likely. If you're talking about 20 and 30 somethings with very well-educated people, yeah, they can do it. They can re-educate themselves. They can retrain themselves, but they still have to leave their homes.
That's well said, Dr. Sullivan, and I think many should listen to that. I want to conclude with one question regarding nuclear. Do you think a civil nuclear agreement between Saudi Arabia and US still possible?
It's more difficult now after the troubles in the Eastern Mediterranean. However, the United States and Saudi Arabia have been talking about this for decades. And it would be to our benefit to at least make small moves toward developing education to begin with in Saudi Arabia. Bring some good Saudi students over here to learn about nuclear power and to understand the proliferation issues. But one of the assumptions that will be required if Saudi Arabia is going to share nuclear technology with the United States is that they sign a 1-2-3 agreement, much like what the UAE did.
And they don't
So
want.
far, no, they don't want to do that, so they can sign an agreement with the Chinese and the Russians, who are actually dominating the export of nuclear power plants, and their power plants are not as safe or have lower, much higher proliferation risks. And what happens when that happens, this is something a lot of people don't think about it. When a country exports nuclear power plants to another country, they're there for 80 to 100 years, helping out on other issues. They will have leverage in that country on other issues. Do you want 80 to 100 years of Chinese and Russian pressure because they're building nuclear power plants? Because that is what you will get. Are you ready for that?
Some people say that the agreement or the Section 123 is no longer valid. I mean, I that's what Elliot Abram said to me this year in an interview. He was talking about if Iran now is enriching, so why, prohibiting or not allowing other countries that are friends of the US?
Well, there needs to be some way of controlling enrichment. Iran is a totally different story from Saudi Arabia. The country that controls uranium enrichment by about 52% is Russia. And China has a big pile of it too. We should be worried about that, and that dominating the nuclear industry for the next few years. The United States has banned the import of Russian uranium and Russian enriched uranium as of August of this year. I don't know why it took them so long, but there's also a waiver because it's going to take a lot of US companies a long time to adjust their supply chains to be away from Russia. We're going to have to build more enrichment facilities here. I think the question most Americans have and most politicians have here about allowing Saudi Arabia to have nuclear power is, what are they going to do with the enriched uranium? When you produce electricity in a nuclear power plant, there's proliferation risk in the fissile material that is in the waste. What are they going to do with that? Well, that worry. And politicians worry about elections. They don't worry about big issues like national security. Please, they don't do that. They're looking for the next election. And the last thing they need is for someone in a company to send them an email or get on the TV and say, you've just handed over proliferation risk to so-and-so country.
Dr. Sullivan, thank you so much for joining me today. It's always an honor speaking with you.
Well, thank you again. I hope I made sense